this is one of the most raw documentaries that I have ever seen. Tales of the Grim Sleeper is really fascinating. There are certain things that I wish it had done, namely focusing more on perhaps the life of the serial killer, and it does kind of touch upon who he was as a person through the eyes of his friends, people who knew him, people who encountered him, but there are not that many, for example, crime scene photos or information about how he did his killings. There's a little bit, but nothing over the top. But as a documentary, I found this really fascinating. This was released in 2014. I watched it on Now TV, and this talks to the friends and surviving victims as well of the serial killer Lonnie David, who was known in LA as the Grim Sleeper, and from, I believe, the 80s until the late 2010, actually, when he was arrested. After 25 years, he killed a lot of women, mostly prostitutes. And I believe they said the youngest was 14. And it looked at how he was caught, but it also mostly looks at what his friends thought of him, what they think of him now. And interestingly, it's actually a British documentary. It's narrated by Nick Broomfield, and he ends up in some pretty interesting situations. This is very raw. There are two things that have nothing to do with the Grim Sleeper, but while he was interviewing somebody outside, there were gunshots in the background, and then a bunch of people running, and then a second later there were police sirens, which, I don't even know what happened. And then further into the documentary, he's actually stopped by the police for not wearing his seatbelt. So it's very, it's very honest and very open about these things. And our narrator, Nick Broomfield, meets various individuals who knew Lonnie, and they also managed to track down some people who are perhaps claimed to be missing or are suggested to be missing, but actually they're not. They're just kind of off the grid, which is really interesting because there are potentially many people he killed, but actually some of them might still be alive. Not that that makes it any better, but certainly it kind of puts the numbers into perspective. What makes this particularly chilling is that a lot of people said that the Grim Sleeper was a great person, and that, he was a really nice guy. They'd never suspect this. The worst he did was dealing in stolen cars, which isn't great. But, he seemed like a genuinely nice person to those who knew him. And to be honest, for quite a bit of this, I was thinking, he can't have done it. This must try and expose the system for arresting somebody who wasn't guilty. But actually, the more it goes into it, and they kind of begin to piece together bits of the puzzle, you can see why they were led to this. Mostly this is about the treatment of black women in this part of LA. It's in quite a poor part of LA, south central LA, and it's about the treatment both of the Grim Sleeper, who himself was black. I think that's worth mentioning. I don't think he was picking on women who were black because of any racism or anything like that, but the police, certainly, there seemed to be this impression that the police weren't quite as bothered about the deaths of these black prostitutes as they would have been if they'd been white female celebrities or something like that, and it really focuses on that. And there's one particular woman, Pam Brooks, who's very instrumental in this documentary in leading Broomfield around and, introducing him to different people. She's very much key to this, and, she talks at length about that, and I think she's got some really interesting views there that are just, they're not pleasant to listen to because that they're real and they're truthful. And I think that is one of the most scary things about this. Unlike most documentaries, crime documentaries, this does not utilise that many crime scene photos. There are a couple, but it doesn't rely on imagery for the shock factor. It actually relies on the realism of this and how it's just impossible this situation feels, and how somebody can get away with it for 25 years. It's very intense. And I think it's brilliantly edited, very well put together. It does say at the beginning that there is a warning for strong language, and yeah, they're not kidding. I have no issues with strong language, I don't care. But if you don't like the use of the F word or mother effers or the N word, and no, I don't think they ever use the C word, surprisingly. I'm not sure, I don't believe so. But yeah, the language is every other word, and it's very strong. So if that's something that bothers you, maybe it's not for you, but it's honestly, it's so beautifully put together. It's shocking, it's disturbing. I would, as I said, like to know a little bit more about the Grim Sleeper. I think a documentary about maybe his life, his childhood, his background, that kind of thing would be fascinating. Maybe it exists. If you know of one, please let me know. But this one is just incredible. It's a triumph. It's rated 7 out of 10 on IMDb, which is really quite brilliant for a true crime documentary. I think us true crime fans, because we watch a lot of them, were quite nitpicky. And this one I just thought was fantastic. Considering I'd never heard of the Grim Sleeper, for whatever reason, this was my introduction. And I'm so pleased with it. I'm so glad I watched it. It's quite long for a true crime documentary. It's almost 2 hours. Usually they're about an hour. The time flew by. It's brutally honest and absolutely worth watching.